Mexico just went through an election. They elected the first female Jewish leftist party candidate, not getting a lot of attention actually in the international press, which is surprising, but especially downplaying the fact that out of 20,000 candidates running for federal, state, local office, we have on record at least 137 assassinations. This is coming where there's graduation parties of American kids taking keg stands and puking on donkeys in Cabo. And then in the interior, you have political third world type behavior. So, which again is what makes Mexico just the wildest country on earth. But so obviously, you take it from there. Do you think?
Sure.
Where is this coming from, and why?
I mean, again, we just lived through one of the most violent presidencies in history. We've had several. The Felipe Calderon administration, where I got most of my experience, started off a war with the cartels that de-evolved into this just cluster of a thing. This current president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, is part of the leftist movement, very populist guy. Think Donald Trump merged with Maduro. That's López Obrador, a guy who is is a populist. Claudia Sheinbaum is a political candidate that basically grew up around him, so very much a member of that cult. This past political cycle we had, I've heard over 30 official political candidates were assassinated during the election cycle, right? As well as some actual politicians already in office after some of the events that took place during the elections. It's a free-for-all. Cartels have politicized deeply, and some of them are betting their livelihoods and their organizations' influence within the political organizations that they are now funding. We see a Morena party that is probably on the side of the Sinaloa cartel or some factions of the Sinaloa Confederation. We saw a president that visited Bandiraguato, the birthplace of El Chapo Guzman, like 6 times during his presidency. Like he's the president that's visited that forgotten place the most. So there's obviously some sort of relationship there. What I see is Mexico going through very much the same heading it's been on for the past few years with the current president. Hands-off approach as far as cartels go. Abrazo no balazos is the policy, and saying that nothing is wrong is probably kind of like the main directive that the current government has. Mm. And she looks like somebody's going to basically continue on this policy.
Okay. So it's good times ahead for the cartels. You think it's going to be business as usual, more or less?
For a few organizations, it's probably going to be business as usual. Some of the classic standouts of the Sinaloa Confederation are probably going to be business as usual. You also see a growing... one of the first people to congratulate Sheinbaum on her victory was Xi Jinping. So China's very much betting on this victory as a way into Mexico as far as manufacturing. So it's a celebrated victory in a lot of ways, mostly because of the influence that is being now kind of showcased publicly as far as outside influence and internal cartel influence in some of these political events in Mexico. Mexico's important, and people are coming to realize the potential of Mexico as the next China.
So what I don't understand is if the current administration and the incumbent Sheinbaum are favorable to the legacy cartel, specifically Sinaloa, let's say, why are all of these political assassinations happening then?
Because there's a larger cartel growing in influence, and a few of them, but the main one is the Cartel de Jalisco de Nueva Generación, the New Generation Cartel, is a growing influence and power in Mexico. It's overtaking the Sinaloa cartel as far as territory in the past, And now it's probably going to overtake them in political influence. I think they already got that page out of that playbook, and they got that page probably, pretty recently, maybe 5-6 years ago. This phenomenon started kind of like really taking an uptick, and you can directly see a relationship between the Sinaloa cartel and the New Generation Cartels conflict on the outside, as far as like basically them going after each other's territory, and also the political violence and assassinations are basically at the same time started happening. Once these two large organizations started competing for control over territories, you could see that each of them have their own candidates, so they were politicized.
So when political assassinations happen, they're essentially a proxy hit against a rival cartel.
In a way, yeah. I mean, you have the current feeling in Mexico is that the Morena party is unstoppable. I mean, they won by a large majority in most of the places that they competed, and a lot of the assassinations were targeted at their candidates. So we can assume that there's a cartel out there that doesn't want their people in. Same phenomenon that happens with corrupt cops and corrupt institutions with corrupt leadership in them. You corrupt one member of that institution, and now you can control things that happen on the streets through him. My cartel rivals will assassinate my guy. That's what happens within police forces and some government institutions. Now it's happening at a high level as far as politics in Mexico.
And now is the goal of that to get the candidates or the politicians to then come work for you? In other words, if I kill a mayor in a city in Michoacan where it looks like a lot of the violence was happening, is that to say, hey, you don't work for Sinaloa anymore, you work for Jalisco?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, oh, this guy looks like he's going to win. Let's kill this guy, and let's see if we can afford the other guy that's gonna be the one to replace him. Because everybody that runs in Mexico has a suplente, is what's called, basically a running mate. If something happens to you, you get, the other guy gets replaced.
Yeah. And
some of the high level agreements with some of these criminal organizations happens with the main candidate. The suplente is like it's a forgotten guy in the back room. So if you're on a budget and you want to have some cartel influence in a certain region of Mexico, and you can't afford the main candidate, you kill him and you pay off the other dude. And now the other dude also has a visual live lesson of what happens if you don't play ball.
Right. And there's a good chance that the suplente will say, hey, you know what? I'm not married to the Sinaloa. I'll go with you guys.
I mean, in some cases, that's what's happened. In other cases, it's just basically, oh, that's the Sinaloa cartel candidate. Right. Because he's an exposed element of an organization, public exposed element of an organization. You might not be able to get to them because they're hiding or they're in their territories, but you see their money behind a candidate. So viable target.
Where were the majority of these assassinations taking place in your estimation?
I mean, interestingly enough, in a lot of the contested territories of some of these cartel organizations, some of them happen in Mexico proper, Mexico City, in the area of Mexico City, Michoacan, as you mentioned, which is a contested area right now. I mean, it's been going through basically trench warfare for the past 5-6 years. And it's where the uprisings of these armed movements of civilians happened in the past that were showed on Netflix and the various documentaries. It's a hot zone of activity, and it's a very important place for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is, Americans and their avocado toast and all of the avocados that grow in that region and the money that goes in and out of that place. If anybody's ever asked for extra guac at Chipotle, you've been putting money in one of a few cartel organizations out there. La Familia Michoacana, maybe the New Generation Cartel that runs that is now kind of gaining influence in that area. But most of these places where these political assassinations have taken place, you can directly link to places that are contested as far as control over a territory.
And you're referring to, of course, the extortion of the avocado industry in Michoacan.
Yeah, and that's some giant industry, and there's a lot of money there, a lot of American money. I think there was a boycott for a bit, but it's gold. It's green gold, and again, it's one of those examples of these cartels diversifying, going into regular industry, and or extorting. I mean, again, extortion is one way, ownership is another. You know, we don't hear a lot about these groups coming in and basically making you sell them your land and or just signing it over. That's not extortion. That's a very quiet way of basically buying into regular business. And you know,
so focusing on the avocado industry for a second, what does killing a political candidate in one of these zones in Michoacan, what does that do to further a cartel's interest in, say, the avocado industry?
I mean, if you have control over a town mayor, you have eyes and ears now, and you have a whole armed institution where the municipal police is now on your, now they're your guys. Yeah. You have eyes and ears all over the area now. Now you have ways of of robbing the government blind of its funds by, having competitions for different contracts as far as government contracts. And now you have your cartel ghost companies, shell companies competing for some of these things. So it's not just the influence and the power behind it and having control over a region because you have the political candidates there. It's also access. It's access to information, intelligence, and legitimate inroads into industry in Mexico. So some of these organizations are hard to. It's hard to tell where the legitimate parts end and the illegitimate parts begin.
So
this is what they're after.
If a new highway needs getting paved or built in a city in Guerrero, right? That's the cartel is probably going to get that bid if they own that mayor or that governor or whoever's earmarking those funds,
or whoever the cartel wants to get that bid. It could be one of their companies. It could be a company that they're extorting. Right. It could be, it's complex. The means and ways that these organizations make money is not just, hey, we cross drugs into the United States and we get the cash back and we wear pointy boots and big hats and chains. That is an image of the cartels that is vintage. That's like a 30, 40-year-old image now, I guess. These guys are diversified. These guys are trying to figure out ways and inroads into telecommunications. I mean, they took apart a whole telecommunication system that they had already set up a few times across Mexico. They're interested in sea lanes. They're interested in building ports. What would be better, paying off a port authority or building your own port?
Right. So they want to build a port to import chemicals from China to make fentanyl, but they're also going to build, their company is going to build the port. Their electrical company is going to power the port. Their cement company is going to sell the cement to the construction company. And so now you've just diversified and your streams of income are now 10x'd, and only one of them is illegal, right?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, the Sinaloa cartel elements of the Sinaloa cartel historically have done all of this work already. Other organizations that are getting to the same size as it are now doing the same. And that's why you're seeing this upheaval of violence. Now, people are aware of this now, and it's kind of in the open in a lot of ways. I mean, the president, El Presidente Andrés Manuel López Obrador goes to Lagunilla, goes to El Chapo's hometown of La Tuna, and his Bandiraguato, I mean, and for the funeral of El Chapo Guzman, he closed off the federal airspace over that area, so he could have they could have a nice funeral for his mom.
Now, Ed, how does that contradict? How does this this new look, this new modus operandi, if you will, of Mexican criminal organizations, right? The way that they have completely embedded themselves into legitimate society, right? Into the legitimate economy, right? To where it's like imperceptible almost.
Yeah. How
does that contradict with Mexico's growth? Like the GDP, it grew 18% last year. So how do these two things? How are these two things related? going forward?
Sure. So it's insane to think that in a country like Mexico, with all the violence and all the people, the numbers are skewed. By the way, all official numbers as far as people dying and disappearing in Mexico are completely. A lot of those are skewed. Ask me how I know. Because I used to work for the government.
Are they downplayed?
Yeah, they're downplayed. Somebody going missing, they're missing. There's a reason why some of these federal organizations go after some of the mothers that are looking for their missing sons and daughters and stuff like that. Go out looking for cadavers. They're actively being blocked by federal officials now. They don't want them to find anybody because the numbers are going to change.
Right.
You have a country with that going on and all the violence. Yeah, there's some good parts of the country, but Mexico really is like 4 or 5 countries in one. We have Central Mexico, which is our New York, California type people, woke, leftist, all the trans pronouns and stuff like that. Legislation started in Mexico City proper, so that's our New York and California, I guess. You have Northern Mexico, which is a lot of the industry, Baja, Monterrey, a lot of the plugs that go directly into the United States and all of that, and then you have rural parts of Mexico that are kind of forgotten and that kind of do their own thing on the coast. And then you have the jungle parts of Mexico, which are people are really forgotten, like Oaxaca and Chiapas, right? So these are these 5 parts of Mexico. The industrial side of it, the northern part of Mexico, is basically with open arms waiting for all of the exiting manufacturing capabilities of China, because people don't want to invest in China anymore and don't want to make anything in China because of everything that entails. And also because the economy, China's going to the toilet. And all of the manufacturing is moving to where else? Mexico. This is the next China. That's why you're seeing such a stable currency. And that's why you're seeing a lot of people investing in Mexico. And that's why you saw Xi Jinping being one of the first people to congratulate Claudia on her victory. It's probably related to the fact that he wants to make his electric vehicles in Mexico to get around the tariffs. That's probably their objective with that, I guess. Because I think that's where we're moving. They tried to make a Tesla plant, a Tesla building plant in Monterrey that kind of went through, and it was a whole big deal just for one plant. Now there's rumblings of 4 from China, and they're not going to have the same issues with we have to have these ambiental standards built into this. They're not going to give about any of that.
So with the coming prosperity that's coming to certain parts of Mexico, right? The manufacturing hub, the financial center in Mexico City, because those are linked, right?
Yeah.
With this coming up, it's safe to say that. Well, is it safe to say that cartels are actually going to be a thing of the past in terms of these iconic kingpin figures? Chapo, Mencho, don't you? Because Mexico's got a vested interest in trying to not eliminate crime, not eliminate cartels, but to bury them from the rest of the world, right?
I mean, the Mexican people have that wish, but probably the federal and politics doesn't, I guess. There's a giant swath of industry in Mexico and people that live off the money that the United States sends down to Mexico to pay for the war on drugs, for example. You want to talk about cartels that nobody talks about? Ford Motor Company, 511 tactical gear, which make millions off the drug war in Mexico. The United States, through a thing called Plan Merida, which is a bilateral agreement with Mexico as far as basically sending money down to Mexico so they can do the fighting for us, is kind of the idea. That money has been going down there for years, and the problem's getting bigger. I mean, it's not getting any better. You can see, in a lot of ways, and this is not me just theorizing on this, there's been many document leaks from the current administration's Sedena, which is our army, the military in the military industrial complex in Mexico, where you can clearly see that they know that certain politicians in certain regions of Mexico are working for one cartel or the other. Their intelligence apparatus tells them that. So hey, if you're going to go and do patrolling in this region, don't tell the local authorities, because they're not going to help you, because they work for the cartels, right? So they themselves are clearly stating that everybody has a side. Everybody's trying to figure out who's going to come up on top, and everybody's basically vying for power or aligning themselves as far as who they're going to be working for in the future to see who's going to win this war.
So you do think that if Mexico reaches the industrial capacity of China in like the 1990s or the mid 2000s, right, when it was the fastest growing economy in the world, it was their heyday, right? You think that the corruption and the violence and the criminally run state that is Mexico can exist alongside 5 Tesla factories in Monterrey, this modern industrial? You think both of those things can exist in parallel?
I don't see how. I mean, I remember talking to some people that were involved in some of the negotiation for Tesla. Like I do security consulting a lot, so every now and then I get called with questions about that type of stuff. And one of the things that they were kind of worried about, and these people have worked in a lot of parts of the world, including China, they were worried about paid protection and extortion, which is a field that they had no idea how to deal with realistically. So I don't see this working long term. A lot of these plants moving down there are going to basically create an opportunity for people, and people that are already working down in Mexico will know this already. There's no way of working in Mexico without realizing that there's 2 authorities here: the government and the other government.
Mm-hmm.
La mano peluda, whatever you want to call them. Mm-hmm. They have different names, there's different nicknames to kind of refer to them. But in a lot of ways, now you have institutions, and this has happened to some of the clients that I've had, where they're like, hey, a guy came here, tried to extort money from us, and he gave us a phone, and we talked to this guy. He said arrange payments and stuff like that. So we gave all that to the cops. And then we got another call from the same people. It's like, hey, I know you called so-and-so at the cops. Yeah, he works for us. So like, what the f- are you doing? So this is the nature of it.
So could that happen? Like, could Tesla have to pay the piper? Could they end up having to pay extortion to whoever is controlling?
Many American companies that work openly in Mexico through industry have paid extortion money and pay protection money, and are currently. That's a whole industry, and it's a whole other money-making aspect of the cartels that really doesn't get exposed or talked about a lot.
Wow. So an American company, are they paying the cops? Are the cops the intermediaries, or are they paying the cartel guys directly?
It depends on where you are. It depends on where you are. I mean, you might show up someplace, and again, I can't talk about some of these things, the specifics about some of these jobs that I've been on, but American plant, old company, moves to Mexico, sets up shop. They bought the company in parts. People were already there working, and they had an issue with things, valuable parts that they were making were walking off, right? So they changed security, and it's still happening. They put cameras up, still happening. They called me. And I went in there and like looked around and talked to everybody, and I told the guy, like, you bought this company. Who's the managerial aspect of it? Oh, these guys up here, they're known in the community. They're the fixers. They know everybody. These are the guys. Okay, yeah, those are intermediaries for the cartels. Those guys are connected with somebody from the outside, and they're basically taxing you. Mm-hmm. What do you mean? I mean, that you're being robbed from within. Okay, so fire those guys. Get a call. You hire them back.
Wow.
Or else.
Wow. So you think? So you actually think that this strategy of nearshoring, right? Instead of sending your manufacturing to China, send it to Mexico. You don't think it's gonna last long term.
I think there's 2 things that are going to go on. One, if Trump wins, he's aware of this loophole that the Chinese are trying to exploit, and he's going to just tariff the shit out of everything. So it's not going to do anything long term. That's what I think. I don't know. But you are seeing now a growing incursion as far as like Chinese money business coming into Mexico, and they realize quickly that they can't be too open and upfront about it. So what they are doing is they're investing in Mexican companies, gaining ownership, stock, and all that stuff, and all that as far as controlling decision power in some of these Mexican companies, and setting up in Mexico. Or other international companies. I mean, they bought up Canadian companies in the past to kind of hide some of their dealings as far as mining and like that in Mexico. When the giant lithium deposits were found in Sonora, the Chinese were using a Canadian mining company to kind of buy into some of those rights. And the Americans kind of figured some of that out and blocked it, I guess.
Do you know what's going on in Chiapas? I've heard that Chinese companies are working to try to buy out indigenous land that's full of minerals underneath it. And in doing so, they are employing local or even the super cartels, right? Depends on who they're connected with, to then massacre the landowners to get them to sell so that the companies can take over. Are there any veracity to those claims?
Yes. And if people don't think there is any veracity over those claims, I would say rewind back the clock a little bit. We saw these documentaries on Netflix about all these Mexican townspeople raising up in arms and wearing white T-shirts. People thought that was like that was like some sort of uprising. What I heard and what I realized later on is it was an illegal iron ore mining operation by the Chinese in the area, a few of them. And they were actually paying some of these armed groups to be protection to keep people away. It's been done in the past in Mexico and recent past. And it's probably being done again, specifically with a friendly, open government towards the Chinese right now. And it's going to get even it's going to be even a bit stronger as we move forward.
So the cartels don't mind the Chinese incursion into Mexico.
One of them doesn't. One of them specifically, I think, has like all of the interest for all of the support on that side. I mean, the new generation cartel seems to have some sort of relationship or favoritism, I guess. I don't know. It seems to grow more on the Pacific side, where it has access to those ports, than the other side of the country, which makes me think that something's going on. Also, during the COVID epidemic, it's one of the only cartels that maintains their capacity to infuse fentanyl into their product, while the Sinaloa Cartel Federation was exporting fentanyl from the U.S. into Mexico to load their drugs and then put them back up. There was a case in San Isidro. I think they caught a giant load of fentanyl was coming from San Diego down to Mexico.
Wow.
So you can see there that they have logistical support, at least of some sort of favoritism or some sort of support of some kind.
So
they're not stupid.
So it sounds like Jalisco then Nuevo Jalisco has the bigger plug with China then, if they're able to keep the fentanyl rolling even during the pandemic.
And you're seeing the influence of the Sinaloa cartel. Just like we saw a violent uprising in the Chiapas Oaxaca border area, where you saw members of El Mayo Zambada's historical leader of the Sinaloa cartel, a lot of his armed gunmen basically drive down to the border, which is kind of, think about this. Mexico is a country that has armed gunships and a whole military that you've seen their operations. You've seen what they can do. I mean, the last Culiacanazo, you saw what they could do. Somehow a multi-vehicle convoy with artillery on top of it, technicals, drove across the country from Sinaloa controlled territory all the way down to the southern border to fight these members of the new generation cartel, basically trying to take control of some of these towns, and they were received with applause, right? So something's clearly happening as far as influence and control of the region. You see with the Sinaloa cartel, they weren't stopped by the military, so they probably have some sort of open line of communication is what you could see. And you see a new generation cartel that is the one that's constantly getting harassed by the government, constantly getting high level events as far as captures and pressure So you can see something going on as far as sides and influence as far as who's doing what.
But you also see, as you said, you see the Sinaloa cartel weakened, and their heads are shrinking. Their figureheads keep getting knocked off. So again, it's all a game, right? Like they have to feed the Americans, some targets every now and then, just to keep the beast fed and just to keep the appearance up. But it does make me wonder, like, can this duality, as I said before, can ASU graduates take pictures with bottles of tequila sitting on donkeys in Cabo, while in Guerrero and Chiapas, scores of people are massacred and nobody gets arrested, nobody goes to jail, and new factories from so-called legitimate Chinese and American companies are set up to make goods for the U.S. I mean, it's been going this long, and the game seems to be working, at least for the powers that be.
I think we're coming to a head pretty soon. One of the only bilateral efforts that we've seen as far as politics currently, and this has been a very divisive time for the United States, has been border issues. And another one has been legislation and talks about naming some of these criminal organizations south of the border as terrorist organizations to unleash the military on them. 3 years ago, I predicted that we were going to see some sort of military intervention in Mexico by the United States. And this is before the talk of Trump speaking of this, naming them terrorist organizations, stuff like that went on. So that's where I think we're headed. Because you have an open antagonist as far as the current federal administration in Mexico. AMLO, the current president, has been very vocal and very open in his disdain for the United States as a country, right? And he's basically been a mouthpiece for anti-American sentiment across the Americas. So you have that going on one end, and on the other end, you have this current lady that just won the elections, culturally Jewish. I mean, she says she's an atheist. She shows up to political rallies with a crucifix, and she keeps up appearances because Mexico is a very Catholic country, and she's a politician, so that's whatever. But she's also a Rockefeller Foundation lady, and she went to Berkeley. She's a scientist. The Soros Foundation funded a bunch of media companies in Mexico, and you could see the favoritism as far as the coverage through some of these campaigns. So it's odd, man. This is I've been trying to kind of piece it out and piece it all through. As a candidate, she makes sense. I mean, she's very much a true believer as far as the current president. She was with him since the start, I guess. But she's a different animal as far as the way her background and how she's kind of approaching things. And in none of her political speeches and none of the stuff that she's planning to do you hear anything about fighting the cartels or fentanyl or organized crime or all of this stuff. It's like a non-subject. She's talking about women's rights and pronouns and progressive stuff and all this. Like it's like some weird out of sight, out of mind policy, I guess.
Fascinating. So it was like America 8 years ago.
Yeah.
So what if Trump gets in here? What does that do? What kind of conflict does that create? Because if he gets in, there's this huge demand for border crackdown. A, of the migrants, that's the most important thing. B, of fentanyl. So how does the leftist government in Mexico that doesn't seem to want to even talk about stopping that stuff, how does that come into conflict? And will the new Mexican government be forced to take some action if they want to continue receiving security funding from the U.S.?
I think in the end, the one that I mean, it's a perfect storm. I mean, the United States isn't going through an easy time right now as well. And when the economy gets low, the U.S. usually likes to go around kicking beehives. It's not a judgmental thing. That's the way the U.S. has been in the past. And you look around at the conflicts in the world that could probably spark up, and the U.S. involvement in them, and you look at Israel, and I don't think that's going to be it. The Russians are kind of going back and forth over there, and I don't envision the U.S. sending people to the Ukraine. But Mexico, that's pretty close. That's pretty close.
Do you are you just saying that, or you actually think that the U.S. could send special forces into Mexico to combat this situation?
I not only say that, I've spoken to Congress about these issues, so I know that this is very much on both sides of the aisle. That's very much on their mind.
Do you advise them that that's a good idea?
No, I advise them that's a horrible idea. The humanitarian, the wave of humanity that it's going to create is going to be completely unstoppable. I mean, you can line up every single Marine you have in Pendleton on the border. They're going to still, that wave is going to be like nothing in history. Either you make that border fence irrelevant with an armed incursion into Mexico, or you now have a new Puerto Rico. Those are the only two outcomes.